And then they brought the animals from other planets. Then whenever the animals developed to the point that they needed somebody to make a civilization, you had to pick an animal that could be genetically manipulated to become what now is man. So they picked the ape because it had a large brain capacity and it had hands. So it had to be able to make clothes. The dolphin actually is much more intelligent. It's more intelligent than any other creature on Earth, but he couldn't very well do a civilization. So they picked the ape. And you know, we are 98% compatible with the ape, genetically. We can give an ape blood and it will live. So they manipulated it genetically to become a human being. Imagine all the time this would have taken. So when it finally got to the point that they thought, you know, beginning to have rudimentary skills, that's when they came and lived with the people to give them the next things they were going to need. Every culture in the world has a legend of the culture bringer. The Indians have their corn board. They're told them how to plant. All of the cultures have the legends of the culture bringer, who teaches them how to plant, how to hunt, how to make fire. All of these things were taught. And in the legends, the culture bringer always comes from the sky or from across the water. And they lived among the people to teach them as they went. And because they didn't live as long as they wanted to, this where the legends of the gods and the goddesses came from. Because that's all they were. And I've had many sessions where they'll say, why do they say we're gods? We're just beings. But this is important to know because it's going to go way back. But when you're first starting to teach them, how are you going to know to tell them when to plant, when to harvest? They've got to have a way to do it. This was the beginning of astronomy, teaching them how to tell by the stars. That they would pick certain ones that out of the group that they thought was intelligent enough to give them these mysteries, but the average person couldn't have done it. This is why when they were at Newbridge and they were saying the natives there, the people were just barely beginning to do agriculture and doing the farming. They couldn't have built those things. They couldn't have built these either because they're just learning how to finally exist. Thinking about building monuments. So a lot of this is going to be kind of rough, but in order to tell the movement of the stars and the seasons, you have to have something to gauge by. When you look at the sky, you can't tell. This is where the pillars, the rocks came into place, because you can watch the movement of the stars as they went between the rocks and the pillars. You can also watch the sky as it went behind the different things and know where the constellations were. Even as far back as Babylon, all the temples always have the pillars all the way around. This is because they were watching the movement of the stars. And I got some of this information when I did a session with Dolores Cannon, and she put it in her book because she was a priest at Babylon and talked about the pillars. That's the first time I'd heard of it. That sometimes the top roof is open or has an opening in it. And she said they would sit in the center of the temple and they would calculate the movement of the stars as they went between the pillars. This took centuries of keeping track of all these records. But this is why it was the secret knowledge, the sacred mystery schools, because they dedicated their lives to keeping the records. And imagine all of this, the watching of how the stars would move from place to place. It makes sense, and that's the only way you can tell what was a planet, what was a stationary star, and this is how they can tell the seasons. Because in a lot of these places, there wasn't any difference, especially in Babylon and Egypt, there's no difference in the seasons. But in these other places, they had to know when the solstice, where they were going to be, when they could plant and when they could harvest. So these were very important for them to know about. And a lot of this was handed down to certain people. who would keep the knowledge. I'm really condensing a lot. There's a whole lot more to it. That's why we were at Newgrange. I said I know there was an opening in the top of that because that's what they would do. Also, they're keeping track of their own planets they came from when they're coming around again, and whenever the other would come around again. You know how we do? We try to line up Mars and Jupiter, and we're going to shoot off space planes. We got to know what's the closest point they're going to be to us, or the easiest way to set Mars. Yeah, that's what they were doing. They had to keep track of where their people were, and their people had to know where this one was. So they had these minds that could be seen from above. They know this is where they are. And they had this knowledge way back, so they knew about the ley lines, they knew about the energy points, they knew the best place to put things. But they were schools of astronomy. And one of the scientists, I asked about Stonehenge, and they said it's just an astronomy school, where they were teaching about the movements of the planets. And I said, well, who gave them the knowledge? And they said the knowledge was brought by the survivors of Atlantis. And they're the ones that also built the pyramids, because when Atlantis went down, they had knowledge you won't believe. They could do anything with their minds. They could levitate stones. They could make stone malleable. They knew how to heal with colors and sound. There wasn't anything they couldn't do, and they did a lot with crystals. And they had perfected it. They didn't grow old. They didn't get sick. But it was a remarkable society. It went on for thousands of years. It was not a short-lived society. First you had Lemuria, then you had Atlantis. But it was so, they had learned everything they could do with their minds. You would think that would be enough, but they got bored. That's the way people do, especially the men. Yeah, the boys, they go into, they have this greed and power. So they started playing around with a lot of things they weren't supposed to, just to see what they could do. And this is one of the reasons that Atlantis had to go down, because they were going against the laws of nature. They were abusing the power of the crystals because they were trying to shoot them downward. They had invented lots of portals, lots of time travel. That's how they got back and forth. Or they said when the one at Stonehenge, probably the ETs used it. They traveled through dimensions and portals. They knew where they were. And there are many of them all over the world. They don't travel from this star to that star by what kind of fuel you're using. They know how to raise the vibration and frequency, go through the portals, and be instantly in another dimension. Just like Star Trek. Engage. So they began abusing it. One of the main things they were doing, for the reason they had to go down, was they were interbreeding animals and humans. This is where your legends of the centaurs, the half man, half horse, the minotaurs, all of those legends didn't come from Greece and Roman. They came from Atlantis. Because this is what they were doing. They were doing the interbreeding, and a lot of it was just to make slaves and workers. But usually they were sterile. They couldn't reproduce on their own. But they said they were going against the laws of nature by doing that. And they kept telling me, you need to know these things because you're headed that direction. That, we've been playing around with genetics. And, we are introducing human cells into pigs so they can take the pig organs and transplant them into humans. Because a human will reject an organ if it's an animal, but if it has human cells in it, it will accept it. And they said this is very dangerous. You're messing around with the laws of genetics. And there was one scientist that didn't like the idea, and he kept saying, we're going down a dangerous road here. They said, you can handle pigs, you can eat pork, but what would happen if you were to put an organ in the body that had blood going through it all the time? could introduce a disease where they wouldn't be cured because they didn't know what was going to happen. So, no, I don't drink tea. Oh, okay. So, thank you. So, this one scientist, at least they stopped for a while, and this is now in our time, and they said, let's look at this. But then after a while, they said, no, we don't think there's any danger, and they started doing it. And I just found, and it's in the new book, I thought I had all the reasons why Atlantis went down, and I found something different that I'd never heard before. And I told them I'd never heard this before, and they said that's because we've never told anyone before. Part of it had to do when they began to do this experimentation, they were messing around with the grids of the Earth. They were trying to invent their own universe and create their own universe. And they were playing around with what they called dark matter to do this. And this is important. What does that sound like?
Well, today.
Collider experimentation.
What's a collider experimentation? What's that?
That's what they said, you've got to know this. This is another dangerous thing. It's right over here in Europe. It's huge. It's the biggest machine ever built. And they are used
particles like that to create.
Right, they do.
And they said, they kept saying, you don't want to do this because we could create, they want to create wormholes. They want to create their own universes. It's the same thing Atlantis was doing. And they're saying now, a lot of people said it's dangerous, but they said, oh, it's okay. But that's what they said with the atomic bomb, too. They could have blown up the whole world with the experiments they were doing at that time. But they're doing the same thing. At the time of Atlantis, it had reached the point where they were collapsing the grids of the Earth by what they were doing. It was beginning to implode when they were messing around with the dark matter. Now they're calling it antimatter, but it's the same thing. So, as they were doing it at the time of Atlantis, it began to have repercussions, and it was collapsing the grids of the Earth. So something had to be done to stop this. The only time the ETs can step in, and it's because of the law of non-interference, we have our free will, the only time they can step in and interfere is if we're going to destroy the world, because it would have repercussions throughout the universe. And that's what was happening at the time of Atlantis. They said they kept on, the world would have been destroyed, the solar system, and the entire universe, is because all the grids were collapsing. And so they said we have to do something to stop it. But at that time, the ones I was doing the session with were the keepers of the knowledge. And this is when they began putting the knowledge into the giant telescopes. We were talking about on the bus. To preserve the knowledge, and it's there, and these people are back, and some of them will be able to bring the knowledge from Atlantis and the but what they had to do it in a way that a lot of the knowledge had to be taken away from the people. It's like blowing the fuse. They couldn't go that way again. Now we're building up to that point again. But because the grids were collapsing, it had to go to a certain place and stop. So now the people who are coming back, it's one group that are called the keepers of the grids. They're here to rebuild the grids of the Earth, and to keep it from happening again. So this is kind of getting ahead of it. They've been watching us and taking care of us since the beginning of time. That's why there are no negative ETs. They are just taking care of their own people. They don't want us to destroy the world because it will have repercussions. So with the astronomy was extremely important. There are people who had to know where they were stationed here, because they could be here as long as they wanted. And now we know they are reincarnating as humans to help the Earth. And that's what the so-called abductions, all it is they are taking care of their own people. So they're safe, making sure that their energy is adjusted because energy is difficult to live with in this world. Their energy is different. So they're constantly being taken to adjust the energy and keep the body in physical health. That's all it is. Once you understand it, it makes so much sense. There's a whole lot more to that when I do the lectures on the ETs. But this was the reason for the monuments, because they could be seen from space, like you were saying yesterday about they're seen from above. They had to know where they were. The pyramids, all of it, are observatories, and they're astronomy schools. They have a lot to do with astronomy and the seasons and how they are. So they would know where they were, and so they could keep track of their planet. They had to go back, and they could go back and forth through the dimensions. So that's why Stonehenge was a portal. I think that's why it has those lintels. These must have a different purpose here. But you said they're all connected on the same ley line, aren't they?
Yeah. Yeah, there's the major ley line. And it's very interesting what you said, Dolores, about, we're facing that again with the collider.
That's what they're worried about.
Yeah. Because I just want to show you this map, because it really does throw in what they've found in Europe to where they've actually placed that thing.
But let me ask you a question. You said Newbury and Stonehenge both were the circumference of the Earth?
Glastonbury.
Glastonbury, okay. Glastonbury and Stonehenge. What about Avebury? Is it also the dimensions of the circumference?
No.
It's different?
It's different. Here we go. Is it by happy chance? This is a European ley line network that the collider is placed here on it on ley line number 1. Yeah,
What is
right
in
on
Poland? Is it in Poland or somewhere? I heard about it.
That's where the big particle collider is. It's there.
Way underground.
It's just on the Swedish border. No, but it's on that, and I thought there's no happy chance that it's on ley line number 1. There's 24 ley lines radiating, and that's where it's on.
But I wrote about it in the book, but I don't remember where it was. Didn't they say Poland? It's supposed to be
up here.
Okay, because they're supposed to have different parts.
Yeah, that's on the Swiss border where the collider is being placed.
It's way underground. And it's like the deepest you can go, and it's a huge machine. It's like the biggest machine ever built to smash these things.
Atoms together.
And they say they're trying to create their own universe and to create wormholes. The same thing Atlantis. They said they're calling it anti-matter. The same thing Atlantis.
So it's the wrong way about it. It's not the right. It's just totally against.
That's why Atlantis had to go down, because they could have destroyed the world and collapsing the cities. So they said we're sitting very close to the same thing again.
So what did they think they were doing? What did they think that they were doing?
Oh, that's scientists.
Yeah, just being, yeah.
When I wrote my book on Hiroshima, I did a lot of research into the atomic bomb and all of that. And whenever they were first building, experimenting with the atomic bomb, they didn't know what they were playing with. They could have ignited all the hydrogen atoms in the air and blown up the Earth at that time. But they knew there was a possibility, but they said, we're going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
That's such scientists. They don't care as long as they can. They saw the furtherment of science, and there's a lot of other things that they've done that they don't really care. Look at the HARP project.
Yeah, exactly.
The HARP project. They said, you could destroy the Earth, you could kill all the people. They said, we don't care, we want to try it anyway. That's the way scientists think. It's the same thing that's going on right now. And with these messing around with genetics with the cells. Well, there have been many civilizations that have gone down, not just Atlantis. But each time, they said they didn't want to do it because you had to start all over again. So, you had to begin from the beginning. They began back as savages to build a whole civilization again. But there would always be some left. So when Atlantis went down, some of the survivors went to Egypt. They went to the other parts of the world, and they're responsible for building these huge monuments and sites like this Peru. They're all alike. Yeah, I've been to Machu Picchu, and it's the same thing, the huge stones. They made them to where they all fit together. You can't even put a credit card between the rocks with no cement. They had them there, and you know the Temple of Jerusalem, the original one, had blocks in there that were 20-ton blocks. So it was all built the same way at the same time.
In Italy too, we have some places built in this way. Big, huge walls.
Because whenever the Temple of Jerusalem was destroyed, when the Romans came in, they told them to go in there and just tear the temple down. And I was a soldier, I would say, you want to what? These things are enormous blocks. And at that time, Jerusalem sat on a precipice. It had big abyss all around. It sat on a point. And they had bridges that went across.
I'm making chips and
from
mussels.
And those other places, whenever Jesus came across on the Palm Sunday, there were bridges across these huge abysses. So now they said it's all built up over the thousands of years with debris, and so now it's level if you go to Jerusalem now. But it was sitting on this precipice, and they threw all these huge parts of the temple over into the abyss. They said now the only thing left is the Wailing Wall. But they were existing at that time, huge monuments and things made out of enormous blocks. And it was done with the mind. Now the levitation, it usually took more than one person to do it, but they would do it with sound. And they had different ways they showed me. They would be standing in rows, or sitting in rows, and the priests would be with the rocks, the huge rocks, and they're toning. They're all toning the same tone. Sometimes they're blowing instruments, but it's all the same tone. They would breathe at intervals to keep that tone constant. That was what would levitate the rocks and move the rock. You know in the Bible the story of the walls of Jericho collapsing. They did that with sound. They marched around it and they collapsed it with sound. So they knew how to do all of these things. But as the priests would die off, nobody could replace them. Then they just a huge monument. Nobody knew what they did. But the pyramids are definitely astrological. And they point towards certain constellations. So you can see why. So that's what I'm wondering about. Stonehenge and Newbury, all of those, there must have been a way of tracking these constellations as they came out. That's why when we were there, I said there has to be opening up there. And Cynthia, the person who was with us, said there is. It's got a capstone on it. I said, that capstone comes off, and they said there is, but they don't tell you. Also, they said in that capstone was a crystal, and it was amplifying the light as it came down. But that crystal is missing now. But see, I think it would be watching when these constellations or whatever the star stations were directly overhead, they would know something. There, it's the winter solstice. But what I've gotten though is that they had to teach the people about the seasons for the basics, for the growing. And then they had so much other knowledge. But the main reasons for these monuments were to teach them when to plant, when to harvest, how to live. And so there were priests that had that knowledge. And this is where your white witches came from. They all had those knowledges about the seasons. And then it's all been lost now, but they needed it in those days to survive. This is kind of a rush thing. I usually give a longer lecture. Does that make sense to you? Does that fit in with the versions of these Stonehenge and the different...
Oh yeah,
Yeah, because they were designed to literally announce each passing season by shadow lines, like a gigantic sundial was one aspect of Avebury, which was aligned like newgrange to the winter solstice.
I was looking up the Babylonians. You know, they're the ones that invented the zodiac. They're very, very old. And they're the ones that invented astronomy and astrology. And they said it took centuries of observation to do this. They said it was done with strings and shadows. Yeah. But according to the session with Doreen, they sat in this one place in the center of the temple and recorded the planets as they moved. See how you can do that? The gaps between the pillars, you know when one moved with the other, you keep track of your orbits that way. And the seasons as they went up and down. You know which was the planet by the way it was moving. So that makes a whole lot more sense than they said they were doing it with shadows and with strings. Even shadows had to be recorded some way. But, so there's a whole lot more to this. And that's what the ETs were giving to the developing people at that time. So it's the birth of astronomy and astrology. In my book on Nostradamus, he was using Avebury, that came to the time of Babylon. And they showed 8 planets. That's all they knew about in those days. Movements of 8 planets. So they were able to keep track of it. And he had huge ephemeris that were hundreds of years old that he was using as a movement of the planet. So, I like them to put all these little pieces together and then you begin to get a story.
History, isn't it?
It's history. They don't even think of it. How could the native people build something like that? You know, we went into Stonehenge this morning. They had that painting on the wall there. Did you notice it as we walked in? All these natives dragging down with the ropes. Julie said that one thing you saw, they were dragging. They said they were using string.
Well, they said they made those ropes, you know, it's just like the twine off of the tree, you know, it's like essentially strings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It was done by levitation. But the ETs showed them how to do all of this back at the time of Atlantis. They were very disappointed when everything went down. But they said it was like blowing a fuse. They had to take it away. We'd have used it. But they said this time they don't want to start over again. It takes too long. That's what they want us to progress instead of going backwards. And they've tried it 3 times in our lifetime to get it to where we're supposed to get it. And it's always been people that misused it. Not our lifetime, our known history, I guess you would say. One was the Tower of Babel, or that was it. When they had to keep the people from going the wrong direction. They said the Bible doesn't have a correct real story. These are all pieces that are in several of my books. When I try to tie it together now with these other things, there's a whole lot I'm probably not thinking about. But they said now they think we're going to do it. We have finally tipped the scales and the amount of people coming in. Awaken. Does that make any sense now with these correlations?
Oh yes, definitely.
She's got the Avebury on here, but I know there's something inside there.
What was the point?
These mounds, they were man-made mounds. Well, there has to be something inside.
They think that's the card of Avalon with the church, but it's what John.
Well, it is Avalon though, isn't it? Here is
That's what they think,
Avalon.
but I suppose.
It's Camelon.
They said to be hollow.
Lancelot.
There's one myth saying that it's hollow. What do you think is inside?
It has something to do with all of this.
Well, there's a myth that's little heard of saying there's a planetary disc like you were saying, an ephemeris, yeah, which plots the positions of the planets.
And the bottle, I was going to film the bottle.
Be that held by a crystal that was put
See what everyone's talking about?
Oh yeah, they knew the
this was
movements of the
related.
planets.
They knew all of it.
Fantastic. Thank
And
you.
a lot of the knowledge that they brought from Atlantis when they came to Egypt, they were trying to teach some of the people, but they were just basic people, so they couldn't understand. So they would maybe find one or two that they could teach something to, and they couldn't teach it all to them. So before they died, the priests died, they put a lot of this into the walls of the pyramid, but it's invisible. You can only see it if you're vibrating at the same frequency that it is, but it's there. The knowledge is in the walls of the pyramid, probably in a lot of these places.
Go to the Egypt, these few little things and tune in for a lot of information.
But that makes sense about Stonehenge being a portal too.
Yes.
And I'm willing to bet that the ETs are the ones that knocked the lintels down, trying to close the portal because it was going to be negative, had negative energy around it at that time. That's what I think. Otherwise, how could they get that down?